October 15th, 2023. A Delta Force unit conducting routine sweep operations in a remote Wyoming safe house nearly escorted an elderly janitor off the premises until one operator noticed a faded tattoo on the old man's forearm that matched the insignia of a Black Ops mission erased from all official records 30 years ago. What classified operation was this quiet old man part of, and why was the government so desperate to make sure it never existed? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The wind howled across the barren landscape of western Wyoming as three black SUVs rolled up the gravel path toward an abandoned military compound. Captain Marcus Hayes stepped out first, his boots crunching against the frost-covered ground. The facility had been decommissioned in 1989, or so the records claimed. Now it was just another location on their sweep list, checking Cold War relics for potential security breaches before they were sold off to private contractors. Thermals picking up one signature inside. "Sir," Sergeant Linda Kozlowski reported, studying her handheld scanner. "Ground floor, eastern wing." Hayes frowned. The briefing had been clear. The facility was supposed to be empty. Squatters weren't uncommon in these remote locations, but something felt off. This place was 60 miles from the nearest town, accessible only by a single deteriorating road that most GPS systems didn't even recognize. "Could be wildlife," offered Lieutenant James Brennan, adjusting his tactical vest. "Elk sometimes bed down in these old buildings. Elk don't generate that heat signature," Kozlowski countered, tapping her screen. "That's human. Stationary. Been there for at least 3 hours based on the heat distribution in that section." The team approached the main entrance, a heavy steel door hanging partially off its hinges. Inside, the facility reeked of mildew and decades of neglect. Fluorescent light fixtures dangled from the ceiling like broken bones. Water damage had turned the walls into abstract paintings of rot and decay. Their footsteps echoed through corridors that had once bustled with classified activity. They found him in what used to be a supply room. An elderly man, probably in his late 70s, sat on an overturned crate with a broom in one hand and a dustpan in the other. He wore a faded gray janitor's uniform that looked like it hadn't been updated since the Reagan administration. His wispy white hair caught the beam from Hayes's flashlight as the team entered, weapons trained but not raised. "Sir, this is a restricted area," Hayes announced, his voice firm but not aggressive. "I need you to identify yourself." The old man looked up slowly, his roomy blue eyes showing no surprise, no fear, just a tired resignation. "Name's Walter. Walter Finch. I'm the custodian here." Brennan exchanged a glance with Kozlowski. "So this facility has been closed for over 30 years. There's no custodial staff." Walter shrugged, setting down his cleaning supplies with deliberate care. "Nobody told me that. I show up, I do my job. Been doing it since 1987. Hayes felt that familiar tingle at the base of his skull, the one that had kept him alive through 2 tours in Afghanistan and countless classified operations. Something wasn't adding up. "You're telling me you've been coming to this abandoned facility for 36 years? To clean it?" "Every Tuesday and Friday," Walter confirmed, nodding toward a yellowed schedule taped to the wall. "Sometimes Saturdays, if there's extra work." The schedule was real. Hayes could see that much. The paper had aged authentically. The tape had that particular brittleness that only came from decades of exposure. But the implications were staggering. Who had been paying this man? Why had no one in the decommissioning process noticed a janitor still showing up? "We're going to need you to come with us," Hayes said, softening his tone. The old man wasn't a threat, that much was obvious. But he was definitely an anomaly that needed explanation. "Just for some questions. We'll give you a ride back to wherever you're staying." Walter stood slowly, his joints audibly protesting the movement. "I suppose that's fine. Let me just finish sweeping this section. Don't like leaving a job half done." "Sir, that won't be—" Brennan started. But Hayes raised a hand. Let him finish. There was something about the old man's methodical movements, The way he attacked dust that no one would ever see, that commanded a strange respect. Walter swept with the precision of someone who'd done the same motion 10,000 times. Each stroke is efficient, purposeful. That's when Kozlowski saw it. As Walter bent to scoop debris into the dustpan, his sleeve rode up, revealing his forearm. In the beam of her flashlight, a tattoo became visible, faded and stretched with age, but unmistakable to anyone with the proper clearance. "Captain," she said quietly, urgently. "His arm." Hayes moved closer, his heart rate accelerating. The tattoo was small, no larger than a quarter, positioned on the inner forearm. To most people, it would look like an abstract geometric design. 3 interlocking triangles surrounding a single star. But Hayes had seen that symbol exactly once before. In a classified briefing he'd received when he first joined Delta Force. It was the insignia of Operation Blackwood. The problem was, Operation Blackwood didn't exist. Officially, it had never happened. There were no records, no documentation, no personnel files. It had been scrubbed so thoroughly from military history that even mentioning it was grounds for immediate security review. Hayes only knew about it because his commanding officer had shown him a list of symbols that, if ever encountered in the field, required immediate escalation to the highest levels of command. "Where did you get that tattoo?" Hayes asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Walter glanced down at his arm, as if noticing it for the first time in years. Something shifted in his expression, the vacant, elderly demeanor cracking just slightly to reveal something harder underneath. "That's old," Walter said simply. "We got it a long time ago. I need to know where." Hayes's hand drifted unconsciously toward his sidearm, not in threat, but in readiness. "And I need to know now." Walter set down the broom and looked directly at Hayes. For just a moment, the captain saw past the stooped posture and white hair, past the janitor's uniform and the decades of apparent obscurity. He saw a soldier. "You know what it means," Walter said. "It wasn't a question." Hayes nodded once. "Then you know I can't tell you that." Walter's voice had changed, steadier now, clearer. "Not here. Not like this." Brennan had his weapon halfway raised before Hayes waved him down. "Stand down. Mr. Finch, I'm going to need you to come with us immediately. This isn't optional anymore." "I know," Walter replied, already moving toward the door with a fluidity that contradicted his earlier arthritic shuffle. "I've been expecting someone to show up for 36 years. Honestly surprised it took this long." As they escorted Walter toward the SUVs, Hayes pulled out his satellite phone. This was beyond his clearance level, beyond his command structure. He punched in a number he'd been given years ago with explicit instructions. "Only call if you encounter something that threatens national security at the highest level." The phone rang 3 times before a voice answered. No greeting, no identification. "We have a situation," Hayes said, watching Walter climb into the middle vehicle without resistance. "I need immediate authorization for Protocol Omega. We've found someone with knowledge of Blackwood." There was a long silence on the other end. "Then secure the individual. Do not let him communicate with anyone. Do not let him out of your sight. A specialized team is being dispatched to your location." "ETA 90 minutes. The line went dead. Hayes stared at the phone, then at the old man sitting calmly in the SUV, looking for all the world like a grandfather being driven to a doctor's appointment. What had Walter Finch done 36 years ago that required this level of security? And more importantly, what had he been guarding in this abandoned facility all these years? The drive back to the temporary command post took 45 minutes. Walter sat in silence, hands folded in his lap, staring out the window at the passing landscape. Hayes kept glancing at him through the rearview mirror, trying to reconcile the frail janitor with the implications of that tattoo. They'd set up their forward operating base in a defunct ranger station 12 miles from the compound. It wasn't much. 3 rooms, questionable plumbing, and a generator that coughed like a dying smoker, but it had secure communications and enough space to establish a perimeter. Kozlowski guided Walter to a folding chair in what used to be the station's break room. Someone had left a coffee maker behind, and she busied herself trying to get it working. Hayes appreciated the gesture. Whatever was about to happen, there was no reason to be inhospitable. "Coffee," she offered. Walter nodded. "Black, 2 sugars." "Thank you, miss." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Brennan positioned himself by the door, arms crossed, watching the old man with undisguised suspicion. Hayes couldn't blame him. In their line of work, anomalies got people killed, and Walter Finch was the biggest anomaly Hayes had encountered in 15 years of military service. The coffee maker gurgled to life, filling the room with a surprisingly pleasant aroma. Hayes checked his watch. 63 minutes until the specialized team arrived. He'd never heard of Protocol Omega before today, and that fact alone made his stomach tight. "Mr. Finch," Hayes began, pulling up a chair across from Walter. "While we wait, maybe you can help me understand something. That facility, you said you've been cleaning it since 1987, but it was decommissioned in 89. What happened during those 2 years?" Walter accepted the coffee from Kozlowski with a grateful nod. He took a careful sip, his hands remarkably steady for someone his age. "The official decommissioning was 89. The actual shutdown was earlier. Different things. Explain." "Can't," Walter said simply. "Not without authorization. You know how this works, Captain. You've got the clearance to recognize the mark, but not to hear the story." "Not yet." Hayes leaned back, frustrated. The old man was right, of course, but that didn't make the waiting any easier. "How long were you in the military?" 23 years. Army. Started as infantry, ended up somewhere else. Walter's eyes grew distant. "Somewhere nobody talks about." "Special Forces. Adjacent to it." Walter set down his coffee cup. "Look, son, I know you've got questions. Hell, I've got questions too, like why it took 36 years for anyone to come looking, why my monthly deposits kept showing up in my account long after the operation supposedly ended, why nobody ever told me to stop showing up." That caught Hayes's attention. "You've been receiving payment all this time. First and third Tuesday of every month. Direct deposit. Same amount it was in 1987, which means it's worth a lot less now, but I'm not complaining." Walter pulled a worn wallet from his back pocket and extracted a bank statement, yellowed and folded into quarters. "Been keeping records. Seemed prudent." Kozlowski moved closer to examine the statement. Hayes watched her eyes widen. "Sir, this account routing number. It's from a Defense Department black budget allocation. These codes were discontinued in 1994. Yet the money keeps coming," Walter observed. "Automated system, I figure. Probably buried so deep in some bureaucratic infrastructure that nobody remembers it exists. Or maybe somebody does remember and decided it was easier to keep paying me than to ask why." Brennan spoke up from his position by the door. "You're telling us you've been on the government payroll for 4 decades, cleaning an empty building, and you never questioned it?" "I questioned it plenty," Walter replied, his voice taking on a harder edge. "I also followed my orders. My last commanding officer told me to maintain the facility and await further instructions. So that's what I did. In my world, Lieutenant, orders don't expire just because they become inconvenient." Hayes felt a grudging respect forming. Whatever Walter had been, whoever he'd been, that core of military discipline hadn't eroded with age. "Your commanding officer. Can you tell me his name?" "Colonel Theodore Vance. Died in 1991. Car accident in Virginia." Walter's jaw tightened. "At least that's what the obituary said. I've learned not to trust obituaries." The name meant nothing to Hayes, but he made a mental note. The specialized team would want every detail. He was about to ask another question when Kozlowski's radio crackled to life. "Captain, we've got incoming 2 vehicles, civilian plating, but definitely military grade. ETA 3 minutes. Hayes stood, his hand automatically checking his sidearm. That was fast. We've got 27 minutes before the scheduled arrival. Maybe they were closer than they said, Brennan suggested, moving to the window. But Hayes's instincts were screaming now. Protocol Omega had specified 90 minutes. Military precision wasn't about arriving early. It was about arriving exactly on time. Early meant eager. Eager meant someone else wanted Walter before the proper authorities could secure him. Kozlowski, I need you to run those vehicle plates, now. Hayes moved to Walter's side, his voice low and urgent. Mr. Finch, I need you to tell me right now, is there anyone else who knows about your connection to Blackwood? Walter's expression shifted, the elderly facade dropping completely. You think these aren't your people? I think 90 minutes means 90 minutes, so answer the question. There were 6 of us in the primary unit. 3 died during the operation. 2 died in the years after, officially from natural causes, but I stopped believing in coincidences around 1988. Walter stood, moving with sudden purpose toward the back of the room. That leaves me. Sir, I need you to stay, Brennan started. Those vehicles just stopped half a mile out, Kozlowski interrupted, her face pale. Plates come back to a rental agency in Denver, but the registration was flagged in the system. These are classified vehicles, Captain. Someone went through a lot of trouble to make them look civilian. Hayes's mind raced through possibilities. The specialized team wouldn't use rental vehicles. They wouldn't stop short of the location, which meant these were hostiles, or at minimum competitors, someone else who wanted Walter and whatever secrets he carried. We need to move, Hayes decided. Brennan, get our vehicles ready. Kozlowski, pack our comms equipment. Mr. Finch, I know a place, Walter said quietly. 3 miles north, old mining access tunnel. It's not on any maps because it was dug as an emergency exit from the facility. If we can get there, we can wait this out underground. How do you know it's still passable? Because I check it every month. Part of my maintenance routine. Walter met Hayes's eyes. Captain, I may look like a doddering old man, but I've spent 36 years preparing for the possibility that something went wrong with Blackwood. The fact that people who aren't supposed to exist are coming for me right now suggests I was right to prepare. The sound of approaching engines grew louder. Hayes made his decision in a fraction of a second, the same instinct that had kept him alive in a dozen firefights. We trust him. Move out now. They piled into 2 SUVs, leaving one behind to suggest they were still inside the station. As they pulled away through a maintenance trail that Walter directed them to, Hayes saw the mysterious vehicles approaching the ranger station from the main road. 4 men emerged, dressed in civilian clothes, but moving with military precision. One of them pulled out what looked like a handheld device, scanning the building. They're tracking something, Kozlowski observed. Walter pulled up his sleeve, looking at his tattoo. It's not just ink, he said quietly. There's a microfilament tracker embedded in the design. Standard procedure for Blackwood personnel. In case we were captured, Command could always find us. You've been carrying a tracker for 36 years? I've been bait for 36 years, Captain. Walter's voice was grim. Now someone's finally decided to take it. Hayes pushed the accelerator harder, the SUV bouncing over rough terrain as they raced toward a tunnel that might not exist, fleeing from an enemy they couldn't identify, protecting a man whose very existence suggested their government had buried something too dangerous to ever uncover. And somewhere deep in Hayes's gut, he knew this was only the beginning. The mining tunnel entrance was exactly where Walter said it would be, hidden behind a collapsed retaining wall that looked natural, but had clearly been engineered to appear that way. Hayes had driven past similar constructions in Afghanistan, where insurgents would disguise weapons caches as earthquake damage. "Help me with this," Walter said, already pulling at a section of corrugated metal camouflaged with rust and lichen. Brennan jumped out to assist, and together they revealed a steel door set into the hillside, secured with a combination lock that had somehow survived decades of weather. Walter's fingers moved across the dial without hesitation. 7/23/1904. July 23rd, 1987, he explained, as the lock clicked open. The day Blackwood went active, the tunnel beyond exhaled cold air that smelled of earth and concrete. Battery-powered emergency lights flickered to life along the walls as they entered. Another surprise. Walter noticed Hayes's expression. "Solar panel on the ridge feeds a battery array," he said. "Installed it myself in '94. Figured if I was going to maintain an emergency exit, it should actually be functional in an emergency." They drove the SUVs into the tunnel entrance, which opened into a larger cavern that had been reinforced with concrete pillars. Once both vehicles were inside, Kozlowski and Brennan pulled the camouflage door shut behind them. The sound echoed through the space like a tomb ceiling. Hayes checked his satellite phone. No signal, as expected. They were at least 30 feet underground with solid rock overhead. "How far does this go?" 2 miles. Comes out on the other side of the mountain, exits into a forest service area. Walter moved to a metal cabinet bolted to the wall and opened it, revealing supplies that looked military-grade. MREs, water containers, medical kits, and, Hayes noticed with approval, ammunition boxes. This tunnel was built in case the facility came under attack. Personnel could evacuate while destroying evidence behind them. "Evidence of what?" Kozlowski asked. Walter pulled out a water bottle and took a long drink before answering. "You really want to know?" "Because once I tell you, you're part of this. There's no walking away." Hayes considered that. They were already part of it. The moment those mysterious vehicles showed up, they'd crossed a line. "We're already in, Mr. Finch. Might as well understand why." Walter settled onto a storage crate, the emergency lights casting deep shadows across his weathered face. Operation Blackwood wasn't a military mission in the traditional sense. It was a cleanup operation. In 1983, a research team at that facility developed something they shouldn't have. A biological agent designed to target specific genetic markers. The idea was to create a weapon that could eliminate enemy combatants while leaving friendly forces untouched. "Jesus," Brennan muttered. "It worked," Walter continued. "Worked too well. The researchers got excited, started expanding their parameters. They began testing whether they could target not just nationalities, but ideologies. Brain chemistry patterns that corresponded to certain psychological profiles. By 1987, they'd created something that could theoretically identify and eliminate specific types of thinking. Hayes felt his blood run cold. "That's not possible. It wasn't supposed to be, but they did it anyway." Walter's hands trembled slightly as he spoke. The problem was they couldn't control it. The agent mutated faster than they could adapt their delivery systems. In July 1987, there was an accident. 3 researchers died. The facility went into lockdown, and Blackwood was sent in to contain it, Hayes realized. "To erase it," Walter corrected. "The 6 of us had specific skills. I was a combat engineer. My job was demolition and environmental remediation. We went in with orders to sterilize the entire facility and eliminate every trace of the research. Every document, every sample, every piece of equipment." Kozlowski pulled out her tactical tablet, taking notes. "And the researchers? The ones who survived?" Walter's silence was answer enough. "That's why there's no record," Hayes said quietly. "You weren't just destroying evidence. You were burying a war crime. We were following orders to prevent something worse," Walter shot back, his voice sharp. "You think those researchers were going to just forget what they'd learned? You think other countries wouldn't have paid millions for that knowledge? We did what was necessary." "And afterward?" Brennan pressed. "Why keep you on payroll? Why leave you as a janitor in an empty building?" "Insurance," Walter explained. "The facility couldn't be completely destroyed. Too conspicuous. So it was decommissioned officially, but someone needed to ensure it stayed sealed. That was my job. I was supposed to be temporary, just until they figured out a permanent solution. But months became years, and I kept showing up because nobody told me to stop." Hayes paced the cavern, processing this. "The tracker in your tattoo." That wasn't standard procedure for a cleanup team. Someone wanted to keep tabs on you specifically. All 6 of us had them. I figured it was insurance. If we ever tried to go public, they'd know exactly where to find us. Walter touched his forearm unconsciously. After the others died, I started to wonder if maybe it wasn't just for tracking. Maybe it was a leash. You think someone's been keeping you alive deliberately? I think someone's been keeping me close, Walter said. 36 years of monthly payments isn't bureaucratic oversight, Captain. That's deliberate maintenance. Someone wanted me right where I was, doing exactly what I was doing. A chilling thought occurred to Hayes. The specialized team I called. Protocol Omega. I think you activated something you weren't supposed to, Walter interrupted. I think there's been a contingency plan sitting dormant all these years, waiting for someone to find me. And when you made that call, you triggered it. Kozlowski looked up from her tablet, her face paled. Sir, I've been trying to get a message out through the tunnel walls, bouncing signals off the emergency repeaters. I just got a response from our main command. They have no record of any specialized team being dispatched. Protocol Omega doesn't exist in any database they can access. The implications settled over the group like a shroud. Hayes had called a number he'd been given years ago, trusted it was legitimate because it had come through official channels. But now, standing in a Cold War bunker with a man who'd spent 4 decades guarding a secret so dark it required multiple murders to maintain, he understood the depth of their situation. Whoever answered your call, Walter said softly, they're not the good guys. They're the people who've been waiting for someone to find me. And now that you have, they need to clean up loose ends. We're the loose ends, Brennan stated flatly. We're all loose ends, Walter confirmed. Me, you 3, anyone who knows about Blackwood. The question is what we do about it. Hayes made a decision. He pulled out his sat phone and removed the battery, then smashed the device against the concrete floor. First thing, we go completely dark. No communications until we figure out who we can trust. That might be nobody, Kozlowski pointed out. Then we do this alone. Hayes turned to Walter. You said this tunnel goes 2 miles. Where does it exit? Forest Service Road near Crowheart. From there, we could reach Lander in about 40 minutes if we drive fast. And in Lander, Walter smiled grimly. In Lander, I have a storage unit I've been maintaining since 1988. Inside is every piece of documentation I could salvage from Blackwood before it was completely sanitized. I've spent 36 years being a loyal soldier, Captain, but I'm not an idiot. I kept insurance of my own. Hayes looked at his team, saw the fear and determination in their faces. They'd stumbled into something that powerful people had killed to keep hidden. The smart move would be to walk away, claim ignorance, hope they were too small to matter. But Hayes had never been good at walking away. All right, Mr. Finch, he said. Let's go see what's worth killing for. The 2-mile tunnel felt longer in the darkness. They drove slowly, headlights cutting through air that tasted stale and metallic. Every 100 yards or so, another emergency light would flicker on, casting elongated shadows that made Brennan grip his rifle tighter. The exit was better concealed than the entrance, a vertical shaft with a ladder leading up to a hydraulic platform. Walter climbed first despite his age, moving with practiced efficiency that spoke to years of regular maintenance checks. At the surface, he disabled a series of tripwires and pressure sensors that Hayes hadn't even noticed, paranoid. Kozlowski asked. Prepared, Walter corrected, pushing aside brush that had been carefully arranged to look wild. There's a difference. They emerged in dense forest, the air sharp with pine and altitude. The Forest Service road was barely visible, 2 tire ruts separated by overgrown grass. But it was passable, and more importantly, it was unmonitored. The drive to Lander took 53 minutes. Hayes kept checking the mirrors, expecting pursuit, but the roads remained empty. Small comfort. Whoever was after them had resources beyond simple vehicle tracking. Lander was a town of barely 8,000 people, the kind of place where strangers were noticed and remembered. They couldn't risk driving military-grade SUVs through the main streets. Walter directed them to a truck stop on the outskirts where, to Hayes' surprise, An old Chevy pickup sat waiting with keys hidden in the wheel well. "You've really thought of everything," Hayes observed. "I've had 36 years," Walter replied. "You learn to plan for contingencies when your government might decide you're a liability. They transferred essential gear to the pickup, weapons, communication equipment, and Hayes's growing sense that they'd stepped into something far more complex than a simple cleanup operation. The SUVs they left in a ravine 2 miles away, stripped of anything identifying. The storage facility was called Secure Space, a collection of orange metal units arranged in neat rows behind a chain-link fence. Walter's unit was in the back corner, number 247. The lock was modern, biometric, which seemed incongruous with everything else about Walter's low-tech approach. "Fingerprint scanner," he explained, pressing his thumb to the reader. "Installed it in 2019. Figured if someone was going to break in, they'd need to bring my actual finger. That would at least tell me they were serious." The door rolled up with a metallic screech. Inside, the unit was meticulously organized. Filing cabinets lined one wall, each drawer labeled with dates. A workbench held what looked like analysis equipment. Microscopes, centrifuges, sealed containers. On the opposite wall, a corkboard covered in photographs, documents, and string connecting various elements like something from a conspiracy theorist's fever dream. Except this wasn't a theory. This was documentation. "Holy hell," Brennan whispered. Walter moved to the nearest filing cabinet and pulled open a drawer. "When Blackwood was sanitized, we were supposed to destroy everything. Incinerate documents, melt down hard drives, autoclave biological samples until nothing remained. But I was the engineer. I controlled the destruction process. And engineers always keep blueprints." He spread documents across the workbench, research papers, test results, photographs of the facility's labs. Hayes leaned in, scanning the dense technical language. What he could understand made his stomach turn. They weren't just targeting genetics, Kozlowski said. Examining a paper titled Neurological Pathways and Ideological Markers. They were trying to weaponize thought patterns. More specifically, they were trying to eliminate them, Walter clarified. Imagine a weapon that could identify and neutralize extremist thinking. No more terrorists, no more insurgents, just people whose brain chemistry suddenly stopped supporting violent ideologies. "That's mind control," Hayes said flatly. "That's what they called it at first. Then they rebranded it as behavioral medicine." Walter pulled out another file, this one marked with red tape and multiple classified stamps. By 1986, they had a working prototype. They tested it on volunteers, prisoners who'd agreed in exchange for reduced sentences. What happened to them? Walter's expression darkened. It worked. Their aggressive tendencies disappeared. So did their creativity, their ambition, their ability to form complex thoughts. They became docile, compliant, and essentially lobotomized without physical brain damage. "Jesus Christ," Brennan muttered. The researchers realized they'd created something too powerful to control. If you could eliminate violent thinking, you could eliminate any thinking the government deemed problematic. Dissent, rebellion, even healthy skepticism, all just patterns of neural activity that could be identified and suppressed. Hayes understood now why Blackwood had been so thoroughly erased. This wasn't just a failed weapons program. It was proof that someone in the U.S. government had attempted to develop the ultimate tool of oppression, a way to eliminate free will while leaving people physically intact. "The accident in July '87, Hayes said. "What really happened?" Walter pulled out a photograph. It showed the interior of a laboratory, or what was left of it. Bodies lay on the floor, technicians in contamination suits, blood spatter patterns suggesting violence. But what caught Hayes's attention was the expressions on the visible faces. Not fear or pain, but blank serenity. One of the researchers was infected with a modified strain. She was working on making the agent airborne for easier deployment. She succeeded, but the agent mutated in her system. When it was released, everyone in Lab 3 was exposed. 17 people. They didn't die immediately. They just stopped caring whether they lived. stopped eating, drinking, and performing basic survival functions. They died over 72 hours, completely at peace with it, and the 3 researchers you mentioned before. Godlowski asked. We're in Lab 3. The ones we eliminated were the senior staff who'd authorized the research. They knew too much, and more importantly, they had the knowledge to recreate it. Walter's voice was steady, but Hayes could hear the weight of decades in it. We had our orders. We followed them. Hayes studied the corkboard, following the strings connecting various elements. Dates, names, locations, a timeline of something that continued long after 1987. Walter, this research doesn't end with Blackwood. You've documented events all the way to last year, because it didn't end, Walter said. The facility was shut down, the research was destroyed, but the people who authorized it didn't disappear. They moved up, got promotions, became senators, agency directors, defense contractors. He pointed to a cluster of photographs at the center of the board. Hayes recognized several faces, public figures, people who appeared regularly on news broadcasts. One in particular caught his attention. Senator Patricia Dunmore, chair of the Armed Services Committee. She was a junior analyst at the facility in 1987, Walter explained. She's the one who initially proposed the ideological targeting concept. She's also the one who signed off on the human trials. And she's still in power, Hayes realized. She's not alone. 8 people from the original Blackwood Oversight Committee are still alive and in positions of significant authority. For 36 years, they've been waiting for this secret to stay buried. And for 36 years, I've been collecting evidence that it won't. Kozlowski was taking photographs of everything with her tablet. This is enough to bring down the entire chain of command. Why didn't you go public? With what credibility? Walter asked. I'm a janitor, an old man with no verifiable service record who cleaned an empty building for 4 decades. Without official documentation, without someone in authority to validate my claims, I'm just another conspiracy theorist. But now, he looked at Hayes, now I have Delta Force operators who found me, who saw my tattoo, who witnessed the response when my location was activated. Hayes understood. They were witnesses. More than that, they were credible witnesses, active military with security clearances and documented chains of command. If they came forward with Walter's evidence, it couldn't be dismissed as the ravings of a delusional old man. It could also get them all killed, the people who showed up at the ranger station. Hayes said slowly, They're not trying to silence you. They're trying to silence all of us before we can connect these dots. Now you're catching on, Walter said. The question is, what are we going to do about it? Brennan cleared his throat. Sir, with all due respect, this is beyond our mandate. We should turn this over to proper authorities. Which authorities? Walter interrupted. The ones who authorized the research? The ones who've spent 4 decades covering it up? The ones who dispatched a kill team the moment someone found me? He shook his head. There are no proper authorities here, Lieutenant. There's just us, and a choice about whether the truth matters more than our personal safety. Hayes looked at his team. Kozlowski was still photographing documents, her jaw set with determination. Brennan looked torn between duty and self-preservation, which was honest at least. And Walter stood among decades of carefully preserved evidence. An old man who'd spent most of his life being invisible so he could protect a truth too dangerous to speak. We need leverage, Hayes decided. If we go public with this directly, we're dead before the story breaks. But if we can make it too costly to kill us, if enough people know what we know, then we become more valuable alive than dead. How do we do that? Kozlowski asked. Hayes smiled grimly. We find someone who hates Senator Dunmore enough to protect us while they take her down. And I know exactly who that is. Hayes's contact was retired Brigadier General Sarah Chen, a woman who'd spent her career butting heads with the Armed Services Committee and had made no secret of her disdain for Senator Dunmore's policy decisions. More importantly, she ran a private security firm with connections to investigative journalists who specialized in Defense Department leaks. They reached her from a burner phone at a gas station 30 miles outside Lander. Hayes kept the call brief, using code phrases they'd established years ago during a joint operation in Syria. 20 minutes later, Chen called back with coordinates to a private airstrip in Montana. "She's sending a plane," Hayes announced. "Wheels up in 4 hours. We get ourselves there. She guarantees protection while the story goes public." "You trust her?" Walter asked. "I trust that she wants Dunmore gone more than she wants us dead." "That'll have to be enough." The drive to Montana was tense. They rotated drivers, kept to back roads, and stopped only for fuel. Kozlowski used the time to organize Walter's documents digitally, creating encrypted backups that she distributed across multiple secure servers. If something happened to the physical evidence, the digital trail would survive. The airstrip was exactly the kind of place that didn't officially exist, a strip of asphalt carved into ranch land. No tower, no lights, just wind and empty sky. A citation jet sat waiting, engines already running. General Chen stood at the base of the stairs, silver hair pulled back. Her bearing still parade ground perfect despite 15 years of retirement. "Captain Hayes," she greeted, her voice carrying over the engine noise. "You certainly know how to make an interesting phone call. General Chen, thank you for—" "Save it, get on the plane. We're flying to D.C. and you're going to tell me everything." Her eyes moved to Walter. "And you must be the ghost that everyone's suddenly very interested in finding." Walter extended his hand. "Walter Finch, formerly of Operation Blackwood, currently an inconvenient witness." Chen's expression sharpened. "Blackwood? I've heard whispers about that for 20 years. Could never confirm it existed." "It existed," Walter confirmed. "And I have proof. They boarded quickly. The jet was configured for business, not comfort. Seats, tables, communication equipment. Once airborne, Hayes spread out the documents, while Kozlowski pulled up her digital copies on a laptop. Chen listened without interruption as they laid out everything. The biological weapon, the human trials, the sanitization, Walter's 36 years of evidence collection, and the kill team that had responded to Hayes's Protocol Omega call. When they finished, Chen was silent for a long moment. "Finally, this is bigger than Dunmore. This implicates an entire generation of defense leadership, which is why we need your help," Hayes said. "If we try to go through official channels, we'll be disappeared before anyone hears the story. But if I can get this to the right journalists simultaneously with the right congressional committees," Chen interrupted. "Create enough exposure fast enough that killing you becomes counterproductive." She looked at Walter. "But they'll come after your credibility. They'll paint you as delusional, fabricating evidence." "Let them try," Walter said calmly. "I have tissue samples from Lab 3, preserved and stored in a secondary location. I have the actual biological agent, stabilized and sealed. I have classified documents with verifiable security protocols. And I have financial records showing government payments for 36 years. That's not the portfolio of a delusional janitor. You still have samples?" Brennan looked alarmed. "Of the agent that could reprogram human thought." "Inert samples," Walter clarified. "I'm not stupid. But they're enough for independent verification. Any lab can confirm they're what I claim they are." The plane touched down at a private airport in Virginia as dawn broke. They were met by 3 armored SUVs and a team of security personnel that moved with the precision of former military. Chen's preparation was thorough. No one was getting to them without a firefight. The safe house was a converted office building in Arlington, reinforced and swept for surveillance. Inside, a team of lawyers, journalists, and what Hayes suspected were intelligence analysts waited. Within an hour, they'd begun the process of verification, cross-referencing Walter's documents, confirming identities, validating dates and locations. "The tissue samples," one of the analysts said. "Where are they?" Walter gave an address in Nebraska, another storage unit, another layer of precaution. Chen dispatched a team to retrieve them immediately, with instructions to document every step of the chain of custody. By nightfall, the pieces were in motion. 3 major newspapers had confirmed they'd received preliminary documentation. Congressional oversight committees had been notified. And most crucially, Encrypted copies of everything had been distributed to 24 journalists, activists and foreign news agencies simultaneously. The dead man's switch was "I'm not." Senator Dunmore's response. He came at 11 p.m., a statement through her office, categorically denying any involvement with unspecified allegations and suggesting that certain individuals were attempting to smear her reputation for political gain. It was exactly the wrong move. By addressing allegations that hadn't been made public yet, she confirmed she knew what was coming. The story broke at 6 a.m. Eastern Time. 3 newspapers simultaneously published exposés detailing Operation Blackwood, complete with photographs, documents, and scientific analysis of the preserved samples. By 8 a.m., the story had gone international. By noon, protesters were gathering outside the Capitol, demanding investigations. Hayes watched it unfold from the safe house, feeling surreal. 48 hours ago, he'd been conducting a routine facility sweep. Now he was at the center of the biggest defense scandal in American history. They're calling for Dunmore's resignation, Kozlowski reported, reading from her tablet. 4 other officials have been named. The FBI is opening an investigation. It's not enough, Walter said quietly. He stood at the window, looking out at the city. Investigations can be controlled, redirected. Evidence can disappear. People need to understand what this really means. Chen approached him. What do you want, Mr. Finch? I want to testify, publicly, not in some closed congressional hearing where they can classify my words. I want to stand in front of cameras and tell the world what my government tried to do, what they succeeded in doing. Walter turned to face them. I've been silent for 36 years. I think I've earned the right to speak now. The press conference was scheduled for 2 days later, giving Chen's team time to arrange security and coordinate with congressional allies. It would be held at the National Press Club, broadcast live on multiple networks. There would be no taking it back, no walking away. The night before the conference, Hayes found Walter on the safe house roof, looking at the stars. You don't have to do this, Hayes said. The story's out. You could disappear, live whatever years you have left in peace. Peace, Walter repeated, tasting the word. I haven't had peace since July 23, 1987. Every Tuesday and Friday for 36 years, I've walked into that facility and remembered what we did there. What I did there? This isn't about justice, Captain. It's about finally putting down a weight I've been carrying for most of my life. The people you killed, the researchers. You think this balances that? Nothing balances that, Walter said. But maybe it means their deaths served a purpose beyond just keeping a secret. Maybe it means the truth they died protecting finally matters. The press conference was electric. Walter spoke for 43 minutes without notes, detailing everything with the precision of someone who'd been rehearsing the story in his head for decades. He showed his tattoo to the cameras. He described the labs, the experiments, the accident. He named names, cited documents, provided evidence that couldn't be dismissed or ignored. By the time he finished, 3 senators had announced their resignations. The FBI director had promised a full investigation with complete transparency. And Walter Finch, the invisible janitor who'd spent 36 years cleaning an empty building, had become the most important whistleblower in American history. 6 months later, Hayes received a letter at his new posting. The investigation had resulted in 14 indictments, including Senator Dunmore. The facility in Wyoming had been excavated, confirming everything Walter had claimed. Legislation had been introduced, banning all research into ideological targeting technologies, and Walter Finch had quietly passed away in his sleep, in a small house in Montana that General Chen had arranged for him. He'd lived just long enough to see the truth validated, the cover-up exposed. The secret that had defined his life finally brought into the light. Hayes kept the letter in his desk drawer, along with a photograph from the press conference. Walter standing at the podium, no longer stooped or frail, speaking truth to power with the bearing of a soldier who'd finally completed his mission. Some secrets, Hayes had learned, were too important to stay buried. And some soldiers never stopped serving, even when their government had long since forgotten they existed. The quiet old man with the faded tattoo had taught him that. It was a lesson he'd carry for the rest of his career, and one he'd pass on to every operator under his command. Because in the end, the mission wasn't about following orders. It was about knowing which orders deserved to be followed, and which ones deserved to be exposed to the light. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.